Good morning, dear colleagues. We have with us the President of the Government of Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, with us today. Can I please ask you to take your seats? Dear Prime Minister, welcome to the European Parliament and thank you for being with us. In times of geopolitical change, we have a joint responsibility to promote social justice, democracy and the rule of law. Citizens look to us to defend European values. Dear Pedro, let me thank your country for its support to Ukraine and to Spain's team for the achievements of the Spanish Presidency of the European Council. With the Artificial Intelligence Act, together we have delivered the world's first set of legislation to manage AI and promote innovation. With the critical raw, we will secure EU supplies and European sovereignty. With the political deal on an anti-SLAPP directive, we will protect journalists. We are nearing the end of the year, but there is still a lot of work to do, as we've just had the opportunity to talk about. Our focus remains on trying to find a way forward on remaining files, particularly on migration. People expect us to deliver, and we must. So, Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Presidenta Metsola.
President Metsola, President von der Leyen, Vice President Šefčovič, High Representative Borrell, honourable members. I'd like to start with a brief reference to the date. Normally it's at the beginning of a presidency that the country of the presidency comes to Parliament and talks through the priorities. But bringing forward elections to the 23rd of July 2023 meant that this was not such a suitable approach. So I'm actually before you in the last few days of the presidency, not to talk through what we're planning to do, but to talk about what we have done, what we've achieved, and what remains to be done. I hope it's been worth the wait, and I think it might have been, because in the meantime we've gained a significant ally for the next 4 years with a progressive government in Spain. Spain was faced with a choice, with two different visions of the European construction, the right and far right, to row back on social and environmental progress as achieved in Spain in recent years, applying the failed neoliberal formulae which did so much to worsen the recent financial crisis. The other option was a progressive coalition where, despite having certain differences, we wanted to make progress. We wanted to continue consolidating the European project. We wanted to go for social justice, for labour reform, for respect and democratic cohabitation. The right causes, feminism, green transition, strengthening our common project, which is the European project. Those progressive forces won the elections, fortunately, and formed a new progressive coalition government on the 16th of November, with 179 seats in the Parliament, an absolute majority, the will of the people expressed when over 12 million people participated with groups which are not part of the government, providing support. We will always support the EU, European values and principles and the leadership which we have shown in the rotating presidency of Council, I think bears witness to that. And here we have the second reason why I hope it has been worth the wait. It has been a successful presidency, I hope. I would say that we've had 43 files approved, for instance, more than average. We've achieved significant progress in terms of legislation and policies for the future of Europe. Obviously, time means I can't mention all of them, but I would like to mention a few. We set 4 priorities at the beginning of the presidency when we presented our objectives. Firstly, giving a push to reindustrialisation and achieving open strategic autonomy in the EU. Our citizens have faced a lot of difficulties over the last few years. There's been a shortage of sanitary products, masks. Countries that were worst hit by the effects of the pandemic early on, climate change, economic, social and environmental consequences of that. Putin's war in Ukraine had an impact on energy prices, and there's an economic impact on citizens' pockets. We need to learn from that and improve. The international order has been discussed in this chamber, of course. The international order is changing, and Europe needs to change too. Massive industrial outsourcing to other continents, blind faith in import has to go. We need more domestic production. We need to be competitive in sectors where we're at the vanguard, and we need to be going for the industries of the future so that we have more companies and more quality jobs for our citizens. For that, we need more innovation, industrial policy, and we need to further develop the single market. This doesn't mean that we should be anti-globalization, that we should be protectionist. Some say that, on the far right, for instance. What I'm talking about is strengthening domestic industry, becoming more efficient. This is vital. This is what we need for the future of the European economy. But we'll always be more prosperous if we cooperate with other countries. A few figures that I think are quite eloquent here. If we look at our participation in the global economy, 40% of GDP in Europe depends on that, and 1 in 5 jobs in the EU depends on that. So rather than closing ourselves off in an isolationist way, we need more trade expansion, consolidating, diversifying and enlarging our links with the outside world, modernizing multilateral architecture, development aid, commitment to the welfare of other countries, particularly those in the global south. This is the vision for the future which the Spanish presidency has endeavoured to build over these 6 months of presidency. This is a vision which the 27 heads of state and government endorsed at the recent informal council in the Spanish city of Granada, and we very much hope that this new strategic agenda for Europe will be taken forward in the next presidency. Over the course of the presidency, I think the EU has taken many steps forward. The President of the European Parliament has referred to this too. We've had pioneer legislation on supply of critical raw materials, green and digital technology, a pioneering piece of legislation for developing and adopting AI in Europe while respecting our interests and the interests of our citizens. We've also taken decisions to defend the modernisation of agriculture. And here too the European Parliament deserves congratulation for the agreements which we've achieved, and also yesterday's agreement on fisheries that will ensure the future prosperity of thousands of Spanish and European families. We also have new economic security instruments protecting us against coercion from third countries and protecting free movement of goods, services and people at times of crisis within our single market. At the same time, while we were doing all that, we've also taken the external agenda forward. EU CELAC, I think that was a historic meeting with Latin America and the Caribbean, and that trade agreement with Mercosur, with new trade agreements with Chile, New Zealand, with the Organisation of African, Latin American and Pacific States is highly significant. This will mean something to the citizens of Europe. This will mean that we have more trade with those countries, and this will help us to diversify our supply chains. The second priority, along with reindustrialisation and open strategic autonomy, was to make progress with the green transition and the adoption of measures that would allow us to deal with the effects of the climate emergency. As Europeans, We need to stop climate change and environmental degradation. It's not only about survival, it's also a huge opportunity. If we do it right, if we are resilient and persistent over the next few years, if we don't use crises to postpone our action on the climate emergency, then our action will make us more prosperous and more competitive. We'll be creating new industries. We'll be increasing 1 point of GDP year on year, every year, and over 1 million new jobs only within this decade. This will also help us to drastically reduce our energy dependency, raw materials coming from outside the EU. Just think of how vulnerable Europe is to Putin's Russia, bringing down the electricity bill that our citizens have to pay, making our companies more competitive, and something that people don't mention often enough, and I would like to raise it here, reducing disease. We'll be saving over 300,000 lives per year, which are currently lost due to air pollution and adverse climate events. So what I'm saying with all of this is that the green agenda is not what the far right would have. It's not an obstacle to Europe's competitiveness. Actually, it is the great hope for Europe. So I hope that Europe has taken significant steps forward in the Spanish presidency. We've achieved agreements to reduce polluting gases from industry, to make aviation more sustainable. We've approved pioneering regulations that will allow us to reuse waste better and have more sustainable, repairable, recyclable products. And here too, I would like to thank the European Parliament for its work. We've achieved something which was very important to this presidency, which is the Nature Restoration Bill. This will allow us to recover ecosystems which have been subject to degradation in Europe. We have presented a common front together with the President of the European Commission in COP28. And we've heard that at least we'll be transitioning. It is my conviction that in the not-too-distant future, the regions with the most growth will be the regions growing in harmony with nature. Thanks to the measures that we are currently adopting, I believe Europe can be at the forefront of that economy which is balanced with nature. Reindustrialisation, adaptation, responding to the climate emergency, also social justice and economic justice. In the second half of the 20th century, as a consequence of the Franco dictatorship and the autarky that we suffered for 4 decades in Spain, 2 million Spaniards, including my grandfather and father, emigrated to Europe, looking for jobs, looking for opportunities. Sadly, they didn't have those jobs and opportunities within Spain. They had to face some prejudice. They had to face some rejection. But they also got a welcome. They got a welcome from tolerant people, people who would open up the doors of their houses. They got married to some of these people. They formed truly European families. And it was here in Europe that our parents and grandparents discovered something wonderful, which is that jobs are not just about putting food on the table. It's about dignity in life. And they also discovered that a welfare state system can ensure public health, education, decent pension for people who retire. And when they went back to Spain, once the dictatorship was over, those migrants brought back with them that progress, and they brought back with them some aspiration. They voted, they took part in trades unions, they were active in business. They worked for the Spanish economy to be something more than prosperous, for it to be fair as well. And we govern in Spain with those values. We want that reality to continue. And the reason I say that is that Europe needs more competitiveness. Yes, we need to increase our productivity to continue growing. We also need to ensure that opportunities and wealth which is generated gets through to everyone, to all transitions, and that the cost of the green and digital transitions are not creating a bill which is footed by the most vulnerable in society. And I think we've achieved significant progress in this presidency. We have reached a majority of member states and social representatives at the tripartite social summit, with the Council rotating presidency, Commission and Parliament in October in Brussels, and I believe that we're on the verge of achieving something very important, which is a historic reform of the electricity market. This will allow not only a boost to renewables, but it will bring down electricity bills. It will make them more stable. It will make the system more transparent, which means more information to consumers, to fellow citizens, and it will protect citizens against abuse by energy multinationals. We've also approved various measures that will strengthen consumer rights, that will also improve the labour rights of millions of workers. We've also achieved significant progress in other areas, not just in the social pillar, but the disability card, new measures to combat structural violence in all European societies, violence against women as a form of structural violence, trafficking in human beings, increasing the rights of other vulnerable communities. Now we just have the midterm review of the MFF to deal with, and of course that will be on the agenda this week and indeed tomorrow, and the reform of fiscal rules. We very much hope that there will be an agreement before the end of the year on that, which will allow us to keep to balance the books for public accounts and also meet member states' obligations to security and defence, digital and green transitions, social benefits, and everything else which citizens rightfully expect. So I very much hope that that will be achieved by the end of the month. Our fourth priority was strengthening European unity. Over the last few years, as you all know very well, Europe has been suffering tensions and attacks. There are those who wish to divide us, but they failed. They didn't succeed. Actually, we are more cohesive and stronger than ever. Nobody's celebrating Brexit. Nobody wants to leave the EU anymore, except for a few people on the very far right. Nobody's talking about leaving the EU anymore. Nobody's saying we should have looser links between member states. Citizens now support the European project more than ever, partly because of our response to the pandemic, and this is true across the territory of Europe. I think we've learnt a very important lesson, honourable members. It's a world of giants, and in order to prosper, you need to come together. You need to integrate internally. You need to coordinate when you're faced with external challenges. And for that reason, as the President of the European Parliament said earlier, we need to celebrate the achievements, the Asylum and Migration Pact, for instance, and I undertake to work on a pact which is good for Europe and for all of our societies over the next few weeks. This will allow us to better manage migration, irregular migration, and to strengthen the external dimension of cooperation with transit countries and countries of origin. And logically, too, of course, we will be calling for an orderly migration policy with coordination across member states. Parliamentary agreement on treaty reform, significant achievements on enlargement, with a significant landmark in Grenada that will hopefully be validated at the European Council tomorrow. The time has now come for the EU to open its doors and welcome in Ukraine and Moldova and the Western Balkan countries. We should also consolidate our European political community. Over 40 heads of state and government came to Grenada. We've seen unanimous, cohesive support for Ukraine in its striving for freedom and EU membership. I just want to tell you a quick story. I started the Spanish presidency with a trip here in July, and I hope to end the presidency with the launching of the accession talks.
Pero sobre todo lo que esperamos todos.
But what we all hope for, and I include myself here, is that we'll come back here very soon to celebrate the withdrawal of Russian troops and a long-lasting, fair peace in that country which is fighting so hard for its own freedom and for ours.
Quiero decir que esa claridad,
clarity and unity That's what characterises our response to Russia's unjustified aggression. And that has stopped crime. It has saved lives. When Europe is clear and united, it can do that. So looking at what happened yesterday at the General Assembly of the UN in New York, we need to speak with the same clarity and unity about what is happening in Israel and Palestine. If we want the world to respect us as an actor on the geopolitical stage, as a credible and relevant body, if we want the people of Europe to be proud of us and see that European values are not just words, we need to speak out loud and clear with one voice. We need to condemn terrorist atrocities committed by Hamas. We need to call for unconditional immediate release of all hostages taken by Hamas. We need to support combating terrorism in the Middle East. And we need to recognise Israel's right to defend itself and to exist. Without any doubt whatsoever, but with the same conviction and the same values, we need to say enough, enough death of innocent civilians in Gaza, including thousands of children.
Los bombardeos.
Bombing must stop immediately. We need a humanitarian ceasefire. Humanitarian aid is urgently needed in sufficient quantity for people who are suffering from hunger, thirst and cold. International humanitarian law needs to be respected, and we need to play an active role in contributing to a definitive, integral solution to this conflict, to give a prospect for credible, serious peace, to give form to the two-state solution. The European Parliament has recognised that the state of Palestine needs to live in peace and security alongside the state of Israel.
Y en este tema, como el de Ucrania,
for this, as for Ukraine, Europe needs unity, and over the next few months, Spain will do whatever it can to forge that unity. Unity in diversity and unity in adversity. I think those need to be our slogans in the EU in these very complex times. President, honourable members, I'd like to conclude with some thoughts about the future and ourselves. Here in this chamber, there are political forces who do not believe in the EU. They think Europe is a decadent, spoilt society that we're trying to achieve a green transition and social equality or welfare that we cannot afford. Such people will repudiate the achievements of the last few decades. They're afraid of the future. They hark back to a glorious past which actually never existed and is therefore impossible to go back to. I don't share that pessimism. I do not share that reactionary mindset. Yes, of course, there are things that can be improved, the things which aren't working. But this should never make us forget that despite it all, Europe makes progress. Europe is progressing. It has never stopped since the Second World War. And there is no empirical evidence to indicate that we will cease to do this in future. Europe has all the necessary ingredients to continue being what it is today, one of the most prosperous, socially advanced regions on the planet. Honourable members, we constitute half of global investment in well-being. We are world leaders in trade. We receive foreign direct investment. We're number 2 in terms of innovation ecosystem. We have the talent, we have the business, we have the public institutions which are necessary to be at the forefront of the green transition and to develop the industry of the future. And that's not an opinion, that is borne out by the facts. There's evidence. Now, we should not be complacent. We cannot rest on our laurels. We need to be active. There are a lot of problems that need to be solved, and there are a lot of injustices that need to be corrected. But I say this because we do need to constantly bear in mind our huge potential. It is possible to build a Europe with clean, cheap energy, with full employment, with decent wages, with decent public services, and with a better standard of living for social improvement of all citizens. The time has come to look to the future with more ambition and with more optimism, because the EU is facing a challenge now, which is not about avoiding decline. It's not about the development of other regions around the world. We need to be at the forefront of a new era of global prosperity. Honourable members, it is my firm conviction that we can achieve that. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister Sánchez, I now give the floor to the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to take the floor. Please, President of the Commission.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam President, dear Roberta, Prime Minister, dear Pedro, honourable members. When I look back at the Spanish presidency, the first images that come to my mind are the breathtaking venues where Spain hosted the summits. The royal collections in Madrid, phenomenal. The Alhambra in Granada, unique. But besides the beauty of Spain, this presidency will be remembered for incredibly challenging circumstances. I will never forget, it was the day after our meeting in Granada, where we discussed actually the Russian war in Ukraine. We woke up to the news of Hamas terrorist attack on the 7th of October. And these two conflicts have shaped our work in these months. But in spite of these crises, we have still managed to focus on a huge set of priorities, ranging from competitiveness to climate and energy, from economic governance to migration and artificial intelligence, actually successfully just concluded. And allow me to focus on three crucial issues that have marked these 6 months. First, the situation in the Middle East. Second, our work on energy. And third, on migration. Il y a 2 mois, j'étais en Israël.
2 months ago, I was in Israel, in the Kwarazza kibbutz, just after the Hamas terrorist attacks. And last month, I was in Rafah, where we are working hand in hand with Egypt and the United Nations to bring more assistance to Gaza. Israel has the right to do everything in its power to stop the horrors of 7th of October being repeated. At the same time, Israel has the duty to do everything in its power to protect civilians, even if they are being used as human shields by Hamas. Hamas could stop fighting, free the hostages, and stop hiding behind civilians. The pause in hostilities enabled us to increase aid to Gaza with the help of numerous NGOs. The EU has organized 24 humanitarian flights with more than 1,000 tons of humanitarian aid, and 6 more flights will be operated by the end of the year. On top of emergency assistance, we have to get the two-state solution back on track. There can be no peace without a political future for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. And there are 3 areas of work on which we should concentrate. Firstly, the principles for the day after, and following the debate in the European Parliament a month ago, the consensus on these principles is now strengthened. Our diplomatic action must continue, also with a view to holding an international peace conference. Then there is the situation on the West Bank. Violence by extremist settlers is endangering the prospects of a lasting peace, and it could increase regional instability. That is why I am in favor of penalties for those responsible for the attacks in the West Bank. They must be brought to justice. They have nothing to do with those attacks have nothing to do with the fight against Hamas and must stop. And that brings me to my third point, which is to avoid a regional conflagration. We have seen on Israel's northern border exchanges of fire with Hezbollah. There have been ballistic missile and drone attacks on Israel and attacks on ships in the Red Sea. All of this is dangerous, and escalation can be avoided. We have to work with all the international actors to stop the spread of violence and to open up prospects for peace. We have to do what we can to end this war and renew hope. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now bring me to another subject of my presidency, energy. I haven't forgotten what it was like at the beginning of Russia's war in Ukraine, when 50% of our piped gas came from Russia. We were dependent, and Russia systematically tried to blackmail us. Gazprom didn't fill the storage tanks. We had to deal with the energy crisis, but we managed. We were able to end our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. Less than 10% comes from there now. We're always strong when we join forces. We now have a joint purchasing platform. And remember what the situation was a year ago here in Europe. Now we have 42 billion cubic meters of gas procured jointly for Europe, and prices are 10 times lower. We have stocks at levels around 93%. That means that the time of Russian blackmail using oil and gas is behind us. And we have made huge investments into renewables. We produce more electricity in Europe from sun and wind than from gas. We're modernizing our rules, and we are on the cusp of an electricity market reform. Finally, people will be able to benefit from renewable energy at affordable prices.
The COP28 in Dubai has just reached a historical deal. And a crucial part of it is truly made in Europe. We can be proud of that, because we propose the global pledge to triple renewable energy and to double energy efficiency by 2030. 130 countries immediately joined us, and now the whole world has endorsed our targets in the final COP declaration. This is really, something to be very proud of it. I think this is a global turning point. For the first time, the world is committing to transition away from fossil fuels. For the first time, there is a loss and damage fund to support the most vulnerable countries. So this has the potential to be the beginning of a new era, the post-fossil era. Let's celebrate this. Europe is at the forefront of it, investing in clean and homegrown energy for all. This is the right direction of travel. Honourable members, my third point is migration. In the last 6 months, pressure on our external borders has continued to rise, not only on the Central and Eastern Mediterranean, but also in the Atlantic, and most recently at Finland's eastern border. a reckless hybrid attack orchestrated by Russia. And this is yet another proof that migration is a European challenge and needs a European answer and solution. And this is the spirit that has driven our action throughout this mandate. In the recent months, we have continued advancing on 4 main strands of work. First, we have strengthened our external borders. Bulgaria, for example, or Romania. Now we are supporting Finland with an increased presence of Frontex to patrol its borders. Second, we are combating smugglers. We had almost 60 countries taking part in our international conference to form a global alliance to counter migrant smuggling, because we need to pull our weight together to fight smugglers. This is organized crime, actually internationally organized crime. So it needs an international organized answer. And to get me right, yes, we have an obligation as part of the international community to support those with the right to protection and to save lives. We have fulfilled it in the past, we fulfill it today, and we will fulfill it in the future. But we decide who comes to the European Union and under what circumstances, and not the smugglers and traffickers. And it is for this reason that we have proposed to update our anti-smuggling legislation. It was 20 years old. So it is now up to you, Parliament and Council, to bring this forward as a matter of urgency. Third, on returns. We now have a roadmap focusing on 7 priority countries. Frontex is supporting member states from identification to joint return operations. And these countries are ready to cooperate with us. Our offer is clear. We can grant more opportunities to come to Europe legally, safe legal pathways. And we expect cooperation to ensure the return of irregular migrants that this happens. And this leads me to my 4th point, a comprehensive partnership. We need to strike a new balance with countries beyond our borders. In those countries, migration is part of a much broader picture. It includes not only border management and anti-smuggling, but also investment in the economy, people-to-people exchanges, trade, job creation, youth employment, all the root causes we know very well. And therefore, this approach is now beginning to show results. For example, in Tunisia, the irregular departure from Sfax have slowed down. And we now work to reach similar agreements with Egypt soon, where migration is also part of a much, much broader picture. And we want to create a partnership on this broader picture and with other countries of origin and transit. This is the external side. And then in the internal side, we have the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. It is about to get over the finish line. That is good. And let me thank the Spanish Presidency and the Parliament for working patiently and working relentlessly to build common ground. With everyone's goodwill and flexibility towards a common goal, we can get this pact done and over the finish line. So, let us show to our citizens that Europe can manage migration effectively and humanely. Let us show once again the power of Europe when it stands tall and united. Thank you very much, and long live Europe.
No. Dear colleagues, we must have a support animal in the House. Dear colleagues, can I now give the floor to the representatives of the political groups, starting with the President of the EPP Group, Manfred Weber, for 4 minutes.
So it's obviously another supporter and fan of Ursula von der Leyen here in the plenary.
So, Mr. Sanchez, welcome and congratulations to your election as Prime Minister of Spain. You know, politically, I'm not happy, but as Democrats, we respect the outcome. You are today present to present the main outcome of the Spanish presidency, and you reported today quite technically, but you are not here as an official, you are here as a Prime Minister. And politically, I have to say the EU presidency is not a success story, and I give you some arguments for this. You spoke about the economic future of Europe, Mercosur, 700 million consumers, the biggest single market in the world. We expected that you make sure that we sign it, that South America doesn't fall into the hand of China. Have you spoken with Macron about this? Ukraine membership support, you spoke about this. Have you also spoken with Orban about this? If the Council fails in this historic moment this week, it's also Sanchez's failure. And on the Hamas attacks to Israel, you overshadowed the last Council meeting. You divided Europe when you were applauded by Hamas terrorists, probably to please more the left Sumar, but not to unite Europe. Mr. Sanchez, you have spoken, and also I have spoken about democracy. And the basic principle of democracy is to tell the people the truth before the elections. You cannot promise not to give an amnesty until 3 days before the elections, and then you give it. You cannot be in power for 5 years saying that an amnesty is not constitutional, and then you do it. Yesterday, the Spanish Parliament started a debate about the amnesty law, a law where your socialist predecessor Felipe González opposed publicly and also called it a risk for the Spanish constitution. Europe is worried. The Commission is asking serious questions. Mr. Sanchez, today I only want to prioritise one special point. In the coalition text you signed, you promised to put a special committee in the Spanish Parliament to check judgments, a special committee on lawfare. That goes fundamentally against rule of law, against the separation of power. And yesterday in the Spanish Parliament, when the team of Puigdemont were putting individual judges in the speech, even the socialist team in the Parliament were silent and shocked about what happened there. So I have only one question. Will you go with the socialist team in the Parliament in favour of such a committee, yes or no? And I'm sure you will not deliver today, I'm sure, and that is then a proof that the investigation from the European Parliament Commission is needed, is urgently needed to have a look at what is happening in Spain. Europe is proud about very strong socialists, Willy Brandt, François Mitterrand. And today, Irache, we see now the developments in Spain where people are concerned. We see the problems in Portugal, where Prime Minister's Chief of Staff caught 78,000 in his office, bags of cash. Costa immediately resigned. We had the Kylie case now 1 year ago, and just to recall ourselves, it is not a parliament scandal, it is until now only a socialist scandal, which is on the table. And we have also Slovakia, where we have a pro-Putin team being there, still member of the Socialist Party, Irache, in Europe, Pellegrini and also Fico. So I think you have a lot to do in your camp to clarify the situation there. On the European level, Mr. Sanchez, I finally want to express one general point. We may have different opinions on content, socialists, Christian Democrats, but for this European project it was always clear to unite, that Europe can only stand on 2 feet and not only on one. That's why socialists and Christian Democrats must find a common understanding. That was the same what Alberto, together with others, Greens and Renew, but that was exactly what Alberto Feijó was proposing in Spain, to bring the country together, to heal the wounds, to exclude separatists, extremists from left and right from getting power. You refused this. I want to underline that for us as EPP, the next European Commission must be based on a cooperation on the centre parties in this European Parliament. And I hope that the European Socialists will not do the same as you did, to refuse the cooperation with the centre parties in Europe. You will meet tomorrow in Brussels my predecessor as President of the European People's Party. You will meet Donald Tusk, now elected Prime Minister of Poland. He defeated Kaczynski, and he will restore rule of law in Poland. That is EPP. That is Alberto Feijó's party in Europe, and we are proud about this. He will bring back rule of law to Poland, and we will also do the same in Spain. And Madam President, as a final point, let me recall the words of Martin Luther King, which should be an inspiration for the upcoming Christmas break. I quote, "Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness." Dear Madam President, Madam Commission President, Ministers, dear colleagues, this is a quote which we can reflect on. I wish you all Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
I give the floor now to the President of the S&D Group, Irache Garcia Perez.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Dear Prime Minister Sanchez, welcome to the European Parliament, to the House of Speech and Understanding. Thank you for your leadership in the courageous, historic and united response during the pandemic and Putin's war against Ukraine to protect the middle and working classes. Because despite resistance from the right and the far right, you have managed to lead the way in building a union with greater social justice. Mr. Sanchez, in the face of a right and extreme right that only understand a homeland as being a land of hatred, lies and disloyalty, you have the social democratic family at your side so that you can continue to lead the great transformations that our union needs. Because our common homeland, the European homeland, is built with a more social union that guarantees fair wages, minimum income and paid internships, and also a housing policy at the service of citizens, especially the youngest. The European homeland is being built with more equality because the 21st century is the century of women. And no triumph will be more important than the eradication of gender violence, a macho violence that the extreme right does not even recognise. The European homeland is built with more individual rights and more public freedoms in a union where LGBTI people can also feel, think or love as they wish. In a union that respects immigrants under the protection of a new pact on migration and asylum based on solidarity between states. The European homeland is built with a union at the forefront of the fight against climate change, because thanks to science, we know that we have to limit the rise in temperature and that we have no alternative but to comply with the Green Deal, reform the electricity market to reduce prices and accelerate the use of renewable energies. The European homeland is also built with an open strategic autonomy. It is built with a more humane digital transformation. It is built with a reform of fiscal rules to strengthen public services, and it is built by turning the European Union into an exporting power of peace. Because if we responded to Putin's war against Ukraine with unity and firmness, and I believe we did, we must show the same unity and firmness to lead an international peace conference that makes it possible for Israel and Palestine to live in peace. How can the People's Party and Vox wrap themselves in the flag of patriotism when they've tried to torpedo the implementation of the 160 billion in the recovery plan for Spain, when they've disqualified, ruled out the Iberian exception that led to a saving of 5 billion in the price of electricity, and when they've tried to boycott a pension reform agreed with the Commission that improves the purchasing power of our elderly? Mr. Weber, what is your project for Europe? I know what your project was, to make Abascal the deputy leader in Spain, the same man who takes photos with Meloni, Orban and Morawiecki, the same man who asks for people to hang Prime Minister Sanchez by his feet. So with your autocratic partners, and when you're blocking renewing the National Judicial Council for 5 years, don't give me lessons about the rule of law. Your alliance with the far right has only one project, anti-Europe, because nothing is more anti-European than building walls against the weakest. Nothing is more anti-European than discrimination and endangering coexistence by pitting compatriots against compatriots. Dear Mr. Sanchez, on the 23rd of July, you succeeded in stemming the reactionary tide in Spain. Your victory brought hope to the democratic forces of Europe to continue building a fairer union, so that the generations of today and tomorrow, looking back, will be able to say the EU was up to the task. Thank you very much.
So the President of the Renew Group, Stéphane Séjourné, for 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President, Prime Minister, colleagues. A council presidency at the end of term is always a challenge. The expectations are huge, and rightly so. It requires a cool head and a steady hand. My group, I'm sorry to have to say, would have preferred if the opening of the presidency had not been unnecessarily polluted by national issues. This House often tends to do this whenever prime ministers are on the premises. Nonetheless, you know my group's attachment to the fundamentals of the rule of law, notably judicial independence, and no national law should try to duck those, and my group will pay close attention to the European Commission's recommendations. Nevertheless, the Spanish presidency's resolve is impressive, and we wanted results for our citizens, and we can see these results. And our colleagues who were shut away for hours negotiating on artificial intelligence can testify. We're the first continent to lay down the rules. Electricity market reform was necessary given energy price inflation, and I think we have made substantial progress there. We need an agreement acceptable to all. We already have an agreement on raw materials, which is vital for our economy. And you mentioned a number of points. You also stayed the course on the green transition with agreements as part of the Green Deal on nature restoration, the ban on emissions dangerous to health, and product eco-design. Nonetheless, my group wants to see more done to conclude two important negotiations, the Asylum and Migration Pact and the Stability and Growth Pact. We, Europe's leaders in 2020, should not repeat what happened in 2010. We really need a united and efficient Europe on these matters. These are two files on which Europe's image will depend, and it will be your presidency's legacy. There's work, therefore, to be done. This parliamentary term is not over. We don't know yet the outcome. And on these two issues in particular, your presidency's legacy will depend.
Of the Green Group, Terry Reinske, for 2 minutes.
Thanks a lot. Dear colleagues, dear Prime Minister, dear Presidents, more than 620 billion euros are needed for the green transition annually. Over 125 billion euros are needed for digitalization in Europe each year. 384 billion euros are needed within the next 10 years for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Defense, education, you name it. We urgently need investment, and especially after the breakthrough at the COP this morning, this is also about our global credibility. Because inaction, colleagues, will only make the future more expensive. And dear Prime Minister, I'm not going to lie, we would have hoped, and we still hope, for a more progressive negotiation on the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact in the past 6 months. Because we both know that if we are not careful, we are sleepwalking into the next crisis, despite the fact that we should know better by now. Europe has no time to lose. Europe can under no circumstances fall back into the failed ideology of austerity. During the corona pandemic, we have seen that our critical infrastructure is far more than tracks and roads. Debt rules that are tying us down disproportionately are a barrier for prosperity, for justice. They are a barrier for our common future. And especially as a German right now, I can tell you I know what I'm talking about. This is not for the Greens and their climate investment. This is for our economic competitiveness of this continent. Functioning infrastructure is crucial to connect this continent even closer, to build a truly integrated single market. The US is massively investing. China is moving. The world is not waiting for us, colleagues. Just Europe is lagging behind because we have a number of ideological dinosaurs in our midst who do not understand that smart investment is needed right now. Colleagues, this is for our citizens, this is for future-proof good jobs, this is for a strong industry, this is for a common European future. So we count on you in this debate. And lastly, and we all know that this is probably going to be a very noisy debate today, but Prime Minister, you are very warmly welcome here, because we are happy that there is a pro-European, progressive government in Spain that is going to fight with us to shape the future instead of another far-right party that wants to destroy Europe. Thank you very much.
I give the floor next, on behalf of the ECR group, to Jorge Buxade. 3 minutes.
Gracias, Presidente. Señor Sánchez.
Thank you, President. Mr. Sanchez, you will go down in the history books. Generations of Spaniards will be studying your megalomaniacal, narcissistic, deceitful behaviour, lacking in empathy, and your control freakery. Millions of Spaniards are living beneath the poverty threshold, suffering increased taxes. Millions of Spaniards are unsafe on the streets. But you've left our borders open to massive immigration, feeding into the business of human trafficking mafias. Millions of Spaniards are unemployed, and you're putting your friends in positions of responsibility, to depriving Spain of skilled officials serving the common good. All of you knows your water policy and opening up farming to unfair competition, the fight against depopulation, or now your attempted coup d'etat is exhausting Spanish patience. We have to do away with privileges and impose the equality before the law. You're going in the opposite direction. You have used a specific, clearly unconstitutional law to pardon those who've committed the most serious offences against the Constitution. This is a backward step. You're preventing the constitutional judges from doing their job. They've all spoken out. Your attempted coup. You're taking us back centuries. Your attempted unconstitutional action is leaving you with a debt you're going to have to pay. Your party, your centrist propaganda lack any authority and legitimacy. It's a result of deceiving the Spanish people, a criminal agreement signed in a Brussels hotel by fugitives from justice and a bunch of usurpers. But you haven't got the guts to admit this personally. Mr. Sanchez, in February 1936, an anti-democratic popular front, just like yours, gave an amnesty to those who'd risen up against the constitutional order of the Republic and the unity of the country. They also alleged that what they wanted to do was bring peace and calm to the country. And now the spiritual heir of those three Catalan comrades is continuing with the attitude that killed millions of Spaniards. You're destroying everything that our parents and grandparents worked hard to achieve. You will go down in the history books as the Prime Minister who's unable to walk along the streets of Spain for fear of the Spanish people. And what's even worse is that you're responsible for what's happening to Spain, what will happen to Spain and Spanish citizens if your law goes through. But don't worry, your threats aren't going to make us pipe down. We will move ahead. Spanish people will be there on the streets and in the courts, and we will be constantly mobilised. Thank you very much.
I give the floor now to Marco Campomenosi for 1.5 minutes. 1 minuto e 30, onorevoli.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thanks.
Grazie, President Mazzola. President. Jiena naf li dan it-tip ta' dibattitu jsir problema anke nazzjonali. Aħna rajna ħafna semestri ta' presidenza. Ma nistawx laqas namlu lista ta' affarijiet li saru dawk li ma sarux għaliex dan m'għandux jaqsam xejn ma' l-presidenza. Hemm riżultati pożittivi li kisbu u anki grazzi għal ċerti stħarriġ li qalu illi il-ċittadini huma kontenti. Inti tkellimt fuq ottimizmu fuq affarijiet li rajna naraw darba, jiena forsi daxxin pessimista. Ma nafx hekk inti konx qed titkellem fuq il-grupp politiku tiegħi għax inti għad li hawn forzi kontra l-Ewropa, ma nistgħux ngħidu li aħna.
We are the goodies and you are the baddies, because as we've seen in the past, things like migration, economic governance, something which isn't working today, these are the keys to solve certain problems which are causing real concern to people. Thanks to your splendid diplomats, some important dossiers have been sorted out, but a lot remain to be sorted out. You've got migration, that's not been done yet. And we can hope that the 10 Ts might be sorted out on Monday. There's a trilogue then. I'm pleased to hear you speak in the battle against terrorism. A former president of this House a few weeks ago in Madrid was wounded in a very serious attempt on his life. So, as I say, it's not a question of goodies and baddies. We've all done as well as we can. But you need to understand that millions and millions of Europeans, sometimes in the so-called extreme right, as we're calling us, who aren't happy with what's being done. Thank you.
I give the floor next to Idoia Villanueva Ruiz for the Left Group. 1.5 minutes. We are running very much behind time.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Welcome, President Sánchez, to the European Parliament. And obviously, we've had lots of accusations, and we will continue to hear lots of accusations from the EPP, and this has become a ridiculous custom in this House. But there are significant challenges, and the far right is gaining ground in most European countries. But the Unidas Podemos has defended brave measures which have been the best antidote to the far right. There's been significant progress in this half year. The nature restoration law, artificial intelligence, and also the electric markets. We've seen movement on that as well. Now, one other, these are very practical examples of what the European Union can do. For energy autonomy, we need to have public investment. We need to have renewable energy in the hands of the regions. The European pillar and of social rights and also equality are important. We need to have a social pillar as a priority. Spain has been pioneer in advancing women's rights, and this has been recognised here. But we also have seen a lack of progress on the directive on gender-based violence. There's a black hole, abandoning human rights, and we are working on a pact on asylum migration, and this is very important. But it's unacceptable today to just have words and not have specific action to deal with impunity and to stop the genocide that's planned in Gaza. Spain can and should then also focus on those responsible and not in a European project without credibility. We will never give in to the far right. Thank you very much.
To Mr. Puigdemont for 1 minute.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta von der Leyen, Presidente Sánchez.
Thank you, President von der Leyen, Prime Minister Sánchez. In your speech opening the presidency, you set out an ambition. You called for a Europe of people, meeting their needs and claims. Previous presidencies gave similar statements, and no doubt we'll hear the same again in the future. The problem in Europe was never any lack of promises. The problem in Europe is the fulfilment of these promises, because the failure to fulfil promises leads to a lack of confidence. That lack of confidence may even undermine such a solid project as the European Union. A union of people will be nothing if you don't listen to the people and put them at the centre of your decisions. I'm talking to you today in your mother tongue, but I'm unable to do so in my own mother tongue. Millions of us in Europe have Catalan as our mother tongue, and we're not able to exert such fundamental rights in our language because this is something you should be defending in your presidency. Our right to speak Catalan here is not enforced in the way yours is. Now, if you act out of fear, you never get positive consequences.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Sanchez, speaking as a Spanish Catalan to a Spaniard, I'm going to put my hand on my heart and tell you what millions of Spaniards would like to tell you face to face. Spain says no to an amnesty, to a blow against democracy, ignoring hugely serious crimes of terrorism and corruption. No to an amnesty which you denied you'd do during the election campaign, and one that creates two classes of Spaniards. No to an intolerable amnesty, in the words of Felipe González, the socialist president who brought Spain into the European Union. Spain says no to threatening judges and creating lawfare committees. And we say no to the supreme infamy of transferring national sovereignty away from Parliament to a shameful clandestine bureau, not linked to the European Union, with an international mediator between the Spanish government and fugitives from justice. What a wonderful presidency of the European Union. Mr. Sanchez, do you really think that a few more months as PM are worth destroying judicial independence, the separation of powers and the equality of Spaniards before the law? I'll give you none out of 10 for patriotism, 10 out of 10 for opportunism. But you and your partner, the fugitive Puigdemont, are wrong. Spain isn't giving up. No one's laughing at Spain. We're a great nation, one of the great European democracies, and that's why we will stay out on the streets, in the courts and in Europe, tirelessly saying no to your amnesty. Colleagues, the Sanchez amnesty is selling Spain's dignity for 7 votes in order to stay in power. Your report was false, Mr. Sanchez. There's no generosity here. There's no greatness. There's no kind of agreement. All there is the personal interest of an unprincipled politician whose word can't be trusted, willing to destroy everything just to stay in office. Impunity in exchange for power. That's your legacy, Mr. Sanchez. And Europe needs to listen to the cry of Spain. The Sanchez amnesty is a disaster for Spanish democracy and European values. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor next to Vice President Barnier for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Bienvenido al Parlamento Europeo.
Welcome to the European Parliament, Pedro.
Thank you very much, dear Prime Minister, for a presidency that began under challenging circumstances, but that has achieved so many results. Let me just name 2. One is that we have really come a long way on discussing new rules on migration. We're not there yet, but we're progressing. And the other is the AI Act that we managed to conclude, with which the European Union is the first area to regulate this important topic. And also congratulations on how you managed to get Spain through these difficult times. Excellent economic data, very low unemployment rates. That is really something. Now, I only have a minute of speaking time, so I can't really reply very much to all that has been said about the amnesty. But as far as I can see, in these very difficult times when you have a divided society, and that has happened more than once in Spanish history, amnesty has been a matter to solve this. And if you manage that the Catalan separatist parties renounce to pursue their goal unilaterally, I think this is a great achievement also for the rule of law. Thank you.
I give the floor next to Adrian Vasquez Lazara. 1 minute.
Der Leyen.
Thank you very much, Ms. von der Leyen, Vice President Borrell as well. Well, been waiting for you for 6 months in this Parliament, and what you've done is what you always do. You have explained priorities that are not true because you can't explain the real priorities. If only you'd been here 6 months ago to talk about priorities for the EU, unblocking the migration pact and then trade agreements such as Mercosur, and also fiscal rules as well. But no. What you decided to do was call some snap elections in which you went against everything you pledged. And what you managed to do was divide Spaniards. You put ministers in place, and you talked about co-official languages as well to increase. And what you did is weaken the political capital of this presidency. And then there's the amnesty law, which completely reverses the principle of equality among Spaniards. And you've also given immunity to fugitives who are looking at us here from up there. And this says to, and these are messages to judges and police from the Congress. And without this, it's not going to do well. Thank you.
Now to Jordi Soler. 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta. Señor Presidente, estamos en Estrasburgo.
Thank you, President. Prime Minister, we're in Strasbourg, so we're going to talk about Europe. From what you've said today in your speech, I agree with your pro-European approach. There is the need to defend European unity, particularly at a time when we have the far right unchained with the shameful complicity of the mainstream right. I don't know if I can share the optimism at the end of your speech, though. You and I are approximately of the same generation, but do you know
estar seguros de que dejaban un mundo mejor.
Between us and our parents, they were able to defend us. I wonder whether we can now. We have the levels of poverty, inequality, and precariousness, and huge social pressure in our societies. There's one thing that you've not managed to do is achieve the official status of the Catalan language. As a question of language justice, the speaker is continuing in one of the languages which is not yet official.
Existent a Europa, la batalla pel català a Europa és una batalla justa que cal seguir donant i guanyar-la.
Thank you.
I és urgent guanyar-la.
I give the floor to Carlo Fidanza for 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente, signori.
Thanks, Madam President, Commissioners. President Sanchez, the story of these 6 months of the Spanish presidency has been linked right from the beginning with your own government's fate. You have played in a bold way with early elections and then, more seriously, with the rule of law, the Spanish constitution and the laws, and also the European institutions. You, in order to stay in office, have even tried to get Catalan and Basque recognised as EU official languages, risking that another dangerous precedent will be created. There have been ambitious reforms of the Stability and Growth Pact to try to get beyond the problems of the past, you've also nominated somebody for the EIB presidency. And the Green Deal has actually been worsened, as we've seen in the packaging directive. So there's much more shadow than light in these 6 months. And millions of Spaniards are more and more worried about the future of their great nation. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Gunnar Beck for 1 minute. If he's not here, we go to Manu Pineda. I don't see Mr. Beck. Go ahead, Manu. But he's not here, so he'll come later. Maybe. Go ahead.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister Sánchez, recently you described the genocide in Gaza as an indiscriminate massacre, and you were abused by the Israeli government for saying this. Just as with the UN Secretary General, when you called for the upholding of international law, the Israeli government feels it is justified to despise and insult, well, I don't want to use crude words, but to take this approach to anyone who calls for international law to be upheld. Here, it's not just a question of the children dying in Gaza. International law is also dying. If we do nothing to thwart this, we may as well just give up on the whole structure of international law set up since the Second World War, which was supposed to allow us to solve countries' problems peacefully. Let's be consistent, Prime Minister Sánchez. We cannot call on international law and talk about a massacre. If we do nothing about this genocide, history will condemn us.
Thomas Deutsch is next. 1 minute.
Prime Minister, well, in your speech today, you talked about the activities and the biggest success stories of your presidency, and you said that one of the biggest successes was staying in power. And this approach completely shows a complete misunderstanding of what the presidency is for. You shouldn't be talking about staying in power and electoral success as part of a presidency. Colleagues, we need to help Ukraine, and we can help Ukraine. However, it's becoming clearer and clearer that Ukraine and the EU are not ready for starting negotiations on accession. But the Brussels bureaucracy is doing all it can to not listen or not pay attention to what's in people's interests, and there is significant political pressure, and they are trying to force the accession of Ukraine. The EU is not ready for the accession of Ukraine, and there is significant pressure from Ukraine, and Europe is falling for this. Thank you.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. President Sánchez, in December 2020, Mr. Kaczynski said that courts in Poland are politically dependent on the opposition. You, President Sánchez, said about a week ago that we're using public institutions to attack political opponents in court. What's the difference, please? Are you aware, is anyone aware about an rule of law where parliamentary committees can involve themselves in ongoing legal cases? There's a kind of big brother being set up in Spain, a big judge who is actually now overseeing all the real courts. That's what's happening. Political manipulation of the legal system in exchange for 7 votes. A similar thing began years ago in the Salem witch trials. And if you want to convince us, then return the courts to the way they ought to be. Because I don't believe in witches, but they do exist.
1 minute. Go ahead, Ms. Fitzon. 1 minute for Helen Fitzon. Yes, go ahead.
Tack, fru talman. Premiärminister Sánchez.
Prime Minister Sanchez, and we are seeing fights against cohesion. In Sweden, it's a good example of this. We have a conservative Prime Minister, and the government is completely dependent on the Swedish Democrats, a nationalistic party. And this is at a time when we need more cohesion, more unity. We don't want to have a divided Europe, because a divided Europe will not help resolve the cost of living crisis or the fight against organized crime. We need to be strong, and for this reason we need unity in Europe. So thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez, for all your work focusing on equality. Thank you very much.
Now to Izaskun Bilbao Barantika, 1 minute.
Ongi etorri, Sánchez.
Welcome, Prime Minister Sanchez. Your presidency has achieved some positive agreements for Europe, some linked to the fact that we signed up to support you in your investiture. We need to ensure the timely completion of trans-European networks, which will eliminate bottlenecks, which are something vital for the Atlantic seaboard. We agree with you about the system governing relations between the Basque and Navarrese regional governments and their police forces being fitted into the European institutional system. We need the regional programme to get the next generation funds through to industry and promote an Atlantic macro region. We will be demanding the presence of the Basque language in the Union. We support dialogue and negotiation as a European solution to territorial and national identity conflicts. When you respect diversity, it unites us. Treating the expression of views as a crime leads to confrontation. The amnesty you've proposed will restore the situation in Catalonia and strengthen the rule of law.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sanchez, you recognise a large number of Galicians who want another kind of Europe, a Europe of peoples, because there are lots of policies which affect our lives. European funds on work and energy, transport, the economy, because there's another kind of Europe that's possible for peoples such as ours. So we, Mr. President, want to stand up against the fascism and in favour of coexistence. We want to fight against the corrupt and the neo-fascist speeches which are holding Europe back. We're getting this from the extreme right and the right in this, who still call themselves Democrats. But there's been misuse of European funds by the PP government in Galicia.
To your colleague, now to Margarita de la Pisa Carrion. 1 minute.
Presidente, colegas.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I regret that the Spanish presidency has not honoured the greatness of my country. Perhaps what we've seen shows that when the dignity of humans is not respected, there are no limits to its manipulation. That's clear to us women. We are less safe. Your government has reduced sentences and has freed sex offenders, and it does not stop those that denigrate us and justify rape. And based on that logic, it's not surprising that you have no qualms coming to agreements with terrorists and remaining silent in the face of atrocities. And under your mandate, criminals have been legitimized and victims have been neglected. Yesterday in the Spanish Congress, an amnesty law was presented which perverts the constitutional order and puts our unity at risk. It will leave us behind. It will leave us with higher unemployment, debt and poverty, the opposite of what you have promised. Your blah, blah, blah has stopped charming us. Spain has woken up and Europe will follow us. Thank you.
Wilimski, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes to the Spanish presidency, there's not much to say. It's really more of the same. And it's a bit like Groundhog Day, like the film, because we haven't managed here to reform the institutions, or at least have discussions about that, to bring the European Union back to the people. And we haven't managed to focus on the conflict in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. We haven't managed to bring people around on one table and to ensure security for Europe. None of that has happened. In the next year, I am looking forward to positive developments in the European elections, and hopefully there'll be a big majority for the centre-right, and that will move the European Union towards a better future. In the second half of the year, when Hungary takes over the presidency, which many of you don't want to happen, but hopefully this will allow our Hungarian friends to move the EU in the right direction, away from centralism, focusing on the war in Ukraine. This is what we need to do for the future. But thank you very much, Madam President. And I would just like to say that when people from the left speak, they are able to speak for they extend their speaking time. But that should also apply to people from my group. Thank you.
To Eugenia Rodriguez Falop. 1 minute, please.
Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Welcome, Prime Minister Sánchez. The expectations of this presidency were huge, and it's been seen as an opportunity for social progress, despite the fact that the right, many Spanish members of this House have tried to boycott it. Today, we're taking stock of the situation. Europe is greener, more social and more feminist than it was. There's been a start to the social dialogue, democracy at work, health and safety at work, care, nature protection, the green transition. Of course, we could go much further. Didn't get the ILO measure through, but stressing strategic autonomy has made you excessively dependent on questionable trade deals such as Mercosur, and the Migration Pact may underline the right to asylum. There was an agreement on the reform of the electric market to promote renewables, but there are serious risks of lithium mining or solar panels destroying fertile agricultural land to replace carbon. In right-wing Europe, they're fighting social policy, they're making a noise and improves no one's life.
Voorzitters, ook onder het voorzitterschap.
President, during the Spanish presidency, the EU was a disaster for citizens again. The sanctions against Russia led to a further regression of living standards, the flight of industry from Germany, and an economic recession. The increasing migration led to greater housing shortages, increasing state debt, and led to violence in our cities. Countries such as Hungary do stand up for their citizens. Hungary and Slovenia prevented I think this can be in Poland has also stood up, and Hungary has been opposing the accession of Ukraine, which would cost European citizens billions. you tried to paint as being anti-democratic. Well, I would tell the Council to stop this kind of disaster work on the European Union. Let's follow the example of the BRICS for progress.
Thank you. Mr. Sanchez, let us be honest. The Council presidency is the best opportunity any country has to influence the European agenda and to promote itself. Unfortunately, Mr. Sanchez, you lost this opportunity for Spain. What did you do? You lost the regional election in May. You called for an early parliamentary election at the beginning of the Council presidency and lost it, and then you spent the whole Council presidency negotiating an amnesty law with persons who acted against the Spanish constitution. While Spanish diplomats made efforts here, we had the impression that you were more preoccupied by granting amnesty to separatists than by the success of the presidency. Let me be clear. The amnesty law concerns the European Union. A government granting amnesty to people who broke the constitution attacks the rule of law. The amnesty law is an attack upon the rule of law. And we care about the rule of law because the rule of law is a European value. And let me be clear, who wants to access European funds needs to respect European values. The amnesty law and the attack upon the rule of law risks blocking European funds to Spain. We saw that happening for Hungary. We saw that happening for Poland. It can happen for Spain as well. We do not want that to happen. We want to help the people of Spain, but we ask you, Prime Minister Sanchez, not to be an obstacle in the desire of the European Union to help the people of Spain. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We give the floor next to, for 1 minute, Brando Benifei. Onorevole, prego.
Grazie, Presidente. Thank you, Madam President. Will there be a time will come when they're going to want to hang Sanchez up by his feet, as someone in the centre right said in Spain? Hate speech, so I'd like to express my solidarity with President Sanchez, who's here today, and all the anti-fascist Democrats in Spain. But despite that, Giorgia Meloni asked Mr. Pascal, the man who said those things, to a meeting carried out by her party, a shameful thing, against the history of Italy, which lived through an extreme right dictatorship just like Spain did. We want a more powerful Europe on the world stage. We want Europe that grows, want Europe to be a force for peace and international law when it comes to all those conflicts going on around us. The Spanish presidency coming to an end has achieved important results in these areas. And I need to mention the AI regulation, for which I'm co-rapporteur. A brilliant result for our citizens, workers and companies. Please keep up the good work, sir.
Jordi Cañas, 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta. Thank you very much, Madam President. And Prime Minister, I wanted to, in preparing this debate, I decided to look at the text about the presidency, and if you look at the Dorian Gray tale from Oscar Wilde, this reflected the sins of the protagonist. And what are the sins in the picture of you? The responsibility for the snap elections at the beginning of the presidency, and then also negotiating with criminals for the sake of 7 votes so that you could be inaugurated. But we know what the biggest sin was. That was sacrificing the most sacred values of this chamber and the EU, rule of law and equality. And your presidency will go down in history because of your selfishness and for sacrificing European values for 7 votes. Congratulations.
Diana Riba-Giner, 1 minute, please, Diana.
Gracias, Presidenta. President Sánchez. Existe una coalición.
Thank you, President. Prime Minister Sanchez, there's a global reactionary network. We saw a clear example of this a few days ago with Vox leaders going to share in Javier Milei's victory. There should be a global progressive coalition to fight them, but that will require courage and leadership. And I'm sorry to have to say that we haven't always seen much of that during your presidency of the Council. For example, there's every indication that your presidency will not be able to complete work on the directive against gender-based violence. And then on the amnesty law, well, you were forced to act because it seemed that the conflict between Catalonia and Europe is being turned into something European and therefore requires a European solution, more of a pact, more of a solution. Well, now we can speak on a level playing field and talk about solutions. We are proposing a referendum. What are you going to propose, Prime Minister Sánchez?
Monsieur Collard. Monsieur Collard, 1 minute. 50 secondes maintenant.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, colleagues, the only thing one can say when summing up the Spanish presidency, it's already been said, and I'm sorry for repeating the words that were used, it's selfishness. But this selfishness is perhaps shared by many of us in this House. But what can we do if everybody simply tries to pursue their own interests? It's sad to see that, unfortunately, in the European Union, there's actually a lot of disunion, because although we look like we're serving Europe, there's actually a desire to serve one's own interests and serve oneself. The European Union, from that perspective, is a failure, because unfortunately we haven't been able, it's very sad to say, to work for the common good, to overcome our personal selfishness, to try to achieve a universalism of interest. Thank you.
1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. In this chamber, we've seen many heads of state and government, but yours is a unique case. You're the only Prime Minister to stand here before us who has left the government in the hands of a fugitive of justice, some of the most serious crimes that a politician can commit. And this is unprecedented, although you may say different. And when we talk about energy, energy is buying more and more from Putin. And there's also the crisis of immigration in Canaries as well. Unfortunately, you are between anomaly in Europe and national disgrace, because we have people who've committed embezzlement, sedition, people who are waiting to stand trial for acts of terrorism as well. And you have come here saying that enforcing law is bad to ensure peaceful coexistence. And the rule of law means judicial independence, and judges were very seriously offended yesterday in the Congress, and there's been condemnation of your political agreements. We think it's unfortunate that you're going in this direction to institutional and democratic decline. We're going to continue fighting for the rule of law and institutions. Thank you.
The floor to Javier Moreno Sanchez. 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Prime Minister, first of all, as the son of migrants, I'd like to express the thanks of the Spaniards who had to leave Spain during Franco's dictatorship, which included my parents. Having said that, on behalf of the Spanish Socialist delegation, may I welcome you here. We welcome your re-election as Prime Minister of Spain and the wonderful job you've done leading the Spanish presidency. Because, Mr. Weber, whether you like it or not, what we have here is Prime Minister Sánchez, who tomorrow will be sitting down with Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, to build a different, united Europe, a more social Europe, a more tolerant, a more feminist and a greener Europe. The Spanish presidency has given successful impetus to an ambitious, progressive agenda for the benefit of all of our citizens. For example, on digital platforms or fighting gender violence. It also has to face future challenges with the AI Act and the Nature Restoration Act. APP members stop selling your soul to the devil on a hire purchase to the far right, which just underpins violence and poses a threat to democracy. As you said, Mr. Weber, come back to the European path.
Thank you.
Europe will move ahead with you, Prime Minister.
I've asked for the floor since the beginning of the debate. I will call them out now to be prepared. You speak from your seat. We start with Andrei Halicki and then Maria Grappini. 1 minute. There you go.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The rule of law and democracy are pillars, and this is very foundation of our common European Union. What I am talking about, because no one party can be above the law and no one politician can be above the law. Building majority by political corruption is a crime. Majority, the need of majority in Parliament, cannot justify the crimes and criminal cases. And you cannot ignore the millions of people on the streets. This is the same situation as we had in Poland. And thank you, Spanish socialists, for the very fast reaction when we had demolished rule of law in Poland. You remember the Lex Tusk, for instance. This was the case where immediate reaction was very important and crucial. The Spanish society is very strong, and democracy will win. So you have still a chance to do the step back. Not do mistake as law and justice in Poland. You have a still chance as a European, you have to do. Thank you.
Ms. Grappini next, and then Mr. Boselager.
Mulțumesc, doamna președintă, domnule prim-ministru, stimați colegi.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister, colleagues, I'd like to congratulate the Spanish presidency. We negotiated a trilogue for the gas and nitrogen markets, and hydrogen markets, I beg your pardon, and I'd like to congratulate Mr. Sanchez for what his presidency achieved. I visited Madrid a couple of months ago. I went to meet the mayor, and I'm pleased to see that more than 1 million Romanians are working in Spain, and they all say that their rights in Spain are being respected. I'd like to thank you on their behalf. I'd also like to say that there's nothing more important than social cohesion. That's why I'd like to ask, for the reasons of freedom, it'd be great if your presidency would allow the Spanish presidency would allow Bulgaria and Romania to enter the Schengen area, where you want to be able to travel freely and treated the same as other European citizens. That's why I would like you really to push this forward, get Romania and Bulgaria into Schengen, please. Thank you.
Go ahead. 1 minute, Damien.
Prime Minister, this has been quite a national debate, so I want to bring it back to the European level. We have the UCO coming. And I do want to ask you the question that we asked the President of the Commission this morning. What are you going to do to make sure that Orban is reined in, that we don't give in to his blackmailing when it comes to our support for Ukraine, for the formal accession talks? Are you going to take away the Council presidency? Are you going to push forward the Article 7 procedures? Please let us know your plan about that. Thank you.
Ms. Ceccardi, and then finally Mr. Urban Crespo.
Grazie Presidente. Signor Sanchez, io trovo disgustosi I suoi...
Thank you, President. Your attack on the Italian government is distasteful, and as was the attack on Geert Wilders, who were democratically elected, both of them. No one should be attacked for their ideas. Fighting for your people shouldn't be a crime. What about the Catalan separatists? Isn't it shameful that you signed an agreement with them just to get into government? This political opportunism, this hypocrisy today in this chamber, you're saying we should be controlling, properly regulating migration. We agree with you on that. But I wonder whether Pedro Sánchez, this is the same Pedro Sánchez who attacked Matteo Salvini last year for defending the same line that you're taking here today. That's enough of your hypocrisy and your gratuitous attacks, Comrade Sanchez. Keep your hands off the Italian government.
Le hablo, señor Sánchez.
Mr. Sanchez, I'm speaking to you now as the head of the presidency. There's enough hypocrisy. The EU and governments are complicit in the massacre that's being carried out by Israel against Palestine. If we continue buying and selling arms to Israel, this will not stop. To stop this ethnic cleansing, we need action which forces Israel to end the occupation, and action which means suspending the preferential economic agreement and have an arms embargo on Israel, and also stop the criminalization of solidarity with Palestine in Europe. And I'd like to remind you, in conclusion, Mr. Sanchez, we should not forget the rights of Pedro González, the journalist imprisoned in Poland. Thank you.
The interventions, I give the floor to Vice President Šefčovič, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President, the Prime Minister, the High Representatives, my dear colleagues, Foreign Minister, Minister for European Affairs, and of course, honourable members. I know that time is flying, so if you allow me, I would focus on the topic of this debate, and that's a review of the Spanish presidency, which is taking place among extremely difficult circumstances. And I would like to thank Mr. Prime Minister, your team, for remarkable cooperation and European spirit, which help us to push many difficult files over the finishing line. We've been working together on making sure that Europe will get reindustrialised, that we would deliver more on open strategic economy. And I very much appreciate your support on the critical Raw Materials Act or on building the European leadership on the green technologies and artificial intelligence. We've been working very closely with your team to make sure that we would advance in a digital transition and environmental adaptation. And I would like to thank in particular Teresa Ribera, who was an excellent partner for making sure that in COP we recorded success. She was working very closely with me, she was working very closely with my colleague Commissioner Hoekstra, and they've been a remarkable force which delivers the success we have seen this morning. I would like to thank you for advancing the social and economic justice, be it in the field of new electricity market design, which I believe will bring us low energy prices across Europe, or the significant progress we achieved in the directive to fight against violence against women. And of course, we've been projecting together new sense of partnership towards CELAC countries during EU-CELAC summit. My last two remarks, if you allow, would focus first on our cooperation in the field of foresight. As a Commissioner responsible for strategic foresight, I want to underscore that it was a pleasure and great professional experience to work with your team to prepare the discussion documents for the Grenada summit, because I think that in this way we have demonstrated how the foresight community can contribute to the successful debate on strategic agenda of the European leaders. So from my remarks, honourable members of the Parliament, it's clear that the European Commission enjoys excellent cooperation with the government of Spain, including on our daily work in the course of the Spanish presidency. And I have to say the same cooperation exists also as regards the information that the Commission asked about the draft law, which was so intensely discussed today. A constructive meeting already took place between Commissioner Reinders and Minister Bolaños, and while the analysis of the draft is ongoing, this dialogue helps clarify the things and continues. Thank you very much.
So now finally I give the floor back to Prime Minister Sanchez. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Presidenta, señorías, creo...
Madam President, honourable members, I firmly believe that the Spanish presidency has been successful and very fruitful for Europe because we've managed to make progress in an extremely complex international context. I made the point in my initial speech, we have to be united in diversity and also in the face of the adversity that we are undergoing. Be that as it may, during the course of this debate, I've heard some mistaken and malicious statements regarding the democratic character of my country and the rule of law there. As the head of the Spanish government, I cannot refrain from commenting on this, not because it's an offence to me or the millions of Spanish voters I represent, but essentially because they are false. We can disagree in our ideas, honourable members. We can have different ideologies, but facts are facts. If we want to maintain fruitful, serious debates, we have to be empirical and wield the facts when we speak. And the facts are extremely clear, honourable members. Spain is one of the fullest democracies in the world. That's what it is. It's at the leading edge in the four major existing rankings of democratic countries. And the points attached to it have actually increased ever since I've been Prime Minister of Spain. Spain is a young democracy relative to some others. It's imperfect, as we all are. But according to all the empirical studies, it scores better than some of the oldest democracies in the world. Furthermore, the rule of law in Spain is complete. One of the 25 most solid conditions of rule of law, according to the Rule of Law and Justice report, which is well known. Honourable members of the EPP, we're talking about lawfare. Well, look at how your party manipulated the renewal of the makeup of the Constitutional Court in Spain during the 5 years of its office. We have to do away with this obstacle to the course of justice, which is undermining democracy, which is why I would repeat my willingness to the EPP to meet and ensure that we can work on Article 49 of our Constitution and renew the makeup of our Constitutional Court and look at a new model for the working of our autonomous regions. The people have spoken at the polling stations. We now have a stable democratic government in Spain, and we're there to move ahead. We need to reach an understanding, just as our political families can understand one another very often in this House. I've seen this within the European Council too. I would ask the European People's Party to follow the example of other. I'd ask the Spanish People's Party to copy the example of its counterparts elsewhere in Europe and cease an alliance with the far right. The far right has doubled its vote over the last 10 years. It's the top right-wing option in a third of member states. And millions of Europeans are already living under national or regional governments that contain far right. That's the real threat to Europe and the European project. The threat to democracy is not having a progressive coalition government in Spain, which is perfectly aligned on European principles and values, legitimately elected by the Spanish people, nor does it flow from our policy on negotiation and restoring normal rule in Catalonia, a policy we've been working on since 2018. A decade ago, you may recall, there was hatred, discord, confrontation, which caused great trauma, with echoes beyond our borders of images that still make us sad. No one can feel proud of that period. Remember what Europe said at that time, honourable members. Mr. Reinders, the Commissioner, publicly said, I hope that dialogue between Madrid and Barcelona can resume. And the Speaker said that he thought it was a serious mistake to move ahead with judicial persecution of political leaders in Catalonia. Now, that's what we were asked to do at the time, honourable members, and that's what my government has done. We've resumed dialogue and negotiation to try and solve a problem which proved to be a complete failure under the previous People's Party government. And the results are there for anyone who cares to look at them. Negotiation and the return to the normal institutional framework have been working. The amnesty will underpin that noble goal, because the situation in Catalonia now, honourable members, is infinitely better than it was in 2017, and we're going to continue to improve it. To Mr. Puigdemont, I would say that we need political negotiation within the framework of the Constitution. The amnesty law is an important step in the right direction. It's one that provides, which enjoys one majority backing in our Parliament. It's a constitutional government, and its sole purpose is to overcome a conflict and ensure we have concord amongst our fellow citizens. And I can guarantee to you that we will continue to promote the use of co-official languages recognised in our Constitution, which express the feelings of 13 million people in Spain. Honourable members, we're not just overcoming political conflicts. that's not a threat to democracy. The true threat to democracy in Europe is the headway being made by the far right. And I have to say, traditional right-wing parties bear responsibility for this because they're opening up the doors of government to these parties in coalition governments and embracing many of their ideas. That's the real threat. They're the threat to the European project. This reactionary approach undermines the European project, Mr. Weber. Banning political parties, attacking the separation of powers, suppressing critical voices, ending the European project. They're also putting the brake on the green transition and undermining the rights of LGBT people. Are you aware of all this? Do you really feel comfortable being an accomplice to that threat? I welcome the fact that after 20 years in this House, you've started to show some interest in what's going on in Spain. But if you really want to help, my recommendation to you, Mr. Weber, is that you get to know our country and don't just swallow the unfounded claims from your colleagues from the Spanish People's Party. Please tell me, Mr. Weber, do you know who the Spanish People's Party's allies are in Spain? Do you know what Vox really represents? Do you know how it thinks? Do you know how it defines the European Union? Let me quote to you. It says it's for us mega-state similar to the Soviet Union. And they talk about the community institutions on oligarchies who want to turn our societies into multicultural cesspits. The leader of Vox says that Spain is a country chained by the despotic mechanisms of Brussels, being dragged along by the autonomous communities. Are you in favour of those anti-European statements? Because they're opposed to the kind of federal government you have in Germany. Vox has supposed that certain political parties be banned. They've called for preventing people from being given a hearing in the media. Do you think that's helpful to Spanish democracy? And can I ask you, what do you know about the policies Vox has been working on with the People's Party in the 5 regional governments and the 35 municipalities in which they're in power? Do you know they've cut taxes on major fortunes while reducing public expenditure? Do you know they're doing away with funding to fight domestic violence or renewables? Do you know they're trying to ban theatrical works and changing the names in our streets and putting up signs with the names of figures from the Franco regime? Would that be your plan for Germany, Mr. Weber? Do you think the streets of Berlin should bear the names of the leaders of the Third Reich?
España, señorías.
Spain, honourable members. Spain is a democracy. It's a full democracy. We are a pro-European country, as is its government. We have a robust rule of law. Our government is perfectly legitimate and capable. So please don't commit the mistake made by the right in Europe in the past. And Europe paid a huge price for it. Never again. Thank you very much.
Straight to the votes now.
So, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Colleagues, this brings us on to the votes. Mr. Weber has a point of order. Please go ahead.
Darf ich um Ruhe und auf...
Could I please ask you to be quiet?
Premierminister geht zwar, aber er hat